To everybody, to the Maisels family, to Mr. Maisels, to our Deputy Ambassador Michael Freeman, to Jill Marcus from the South African Reserve Bank, and for all of you very special people. Our first speaker this afternoon will be Avram Krengo. He is the Chairman of the South African Zionist Federation.
Welcome everyone here this evening, this afternoon, to the relaunch of the Isie Maisels Reference Library. A special welcome to Helen Maisels and her husband Benjamin and son Simon, and Keith Maisels. A special welcome also to Jill Marcus, Governor of the Reserve Bank, as well as all members of the bar, the bench, and retired bench as well. It's wonderful to have everyone here to really honour one of South Africa's great citizens, greatest leaders, a lawyer, an incredible member of this community, and someone who we all stand in his shadow and benefit from his legacy, the late Isie Maisels. I want to take this opportunity of thanking the many people who have helped to make today possible and who have helped us to reposition and relaunch the library that you saw a few moments ago. The library used to be housed in the centre of town in the Zionist Federation building. When all the communal organisations came together in this building, Biyachad, a number of years ago, the library was put under the auspices of Biyachad itself, of which the South African Zionist Federation is merely one of the organisations. But it was not an optimal structure at all. It did not work, and unfortunately the library suffered from neglect and a lack of positioning within the new era today of instant access to information, etc. And its previous role as a lending library needed to be changed. I want to take this opportunity of thanking Marcia Parnes for heading up the library committee for so many years, and for always making sure that it was never forgotten, that it was championed, and that what you see today is very much a result of her tireless work over many, many years. I also want to thank two very special individuals who have worked closely with the Zionist Federation for the past 18 months, and that is Rose Norwich and Adrian Collenberg, both of Beitat Fusot, who came to us with the proposal of very much what you see today of the library. Beitat Fusot make extensive use of our archives, of our library, and as in a sense one of the most important users, they were able to assist us in recreating it into what it has become. Rose, Adrian, we cannot thank you enough for your tireless work, not only with us, but for the community, Beitat Fusot, and for the amazing work you do to document the history of this community of South African Jewry. Thank you. very special individuals who've worked in the library, given their time and effort over decades. Firstly, to Norma Schulman, who's been the librarian and at the library for so many years. Thank you. To Eric Matobo, who again has worked in the library, and then to some very special volunteers who, out of the goodness of their hearts, totally without compensation, without any remuneration, have done so much for the library. Maisels, who has installed and designed the computerized library system at no charge, and Leon Lever, who over many years has converted all the old format DVDs, videos, the VHSs, etc., into the DVD format that you saw in the audiovisual section today, again as a volunteer. Thank you so much for all your efforts. And then to our new librarian, Maxine Fine, thank you for the contribution you have already made and the exciting future that the library has ahead of it. It's of immense pride that the library is named after Isie Maisels. This was a man who definitely to this audience needs absolutely no introduction. His footprints, his fingerprints are all over the history of South Africa, the development of South Africa in so many areas. Some of the most famous trials that ever took place, the treason trial, Daisy de Melke, and so much more. He was a giant of not only the legal profession, but of South Africa in general. But at the same time, set this incredible example of not only being a leader of South Africa in every sense of the word, but also always saw a duty and a role for himself in the Jewish community itself. And that role spans so many aspects of not only South African Jewry, but world Jewry. He was the chairman of the United Hebrew Congregation, which was the original organization which used to appoint the chief rabbi of South Africa, the great Walmeren Street Shul, the Berea Shul, and later Santon Shul. He was both president and chairman of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. He was president and chairman of the South African Zionist Federation, simultaneously serving as the head of the Israel United Appeal. He served for many years on the Jewish Agency for Israel, the Board of Governors. So he led the way for South African Jews to play not only a role within the building of South Africa, in the freeing of South Africa into making it what it is today, but at the same time strengthening and enriching this community, defending its rights, and strengthening its indelible bonds with the South African Zionists, with the State of Israel. His wife, Muriel, also was a tireless worker within the community and was president of the Women Zionists of South Africa. And this family, the entire family, have always stood as the archetypal example of what South African Jewry is, should become, and aspires to. And it is just a wonderful occasion to both honour the late Isie Maisels and welcome his family here today, and in a sense create a library and a structure in the 21st century that befits the honour, his honour and the contribution that he has made to South African Jewry. Before I hand over, I would just like to make two small presentations. The first one is to Maisels, if he could please come up and just accept a token of our appreciation for so much time and effort that he has put into the library over many, many years. It's a JNF certificate of a send a child to a summer camp. It's through a gift made by the South African Zionist Federation in the name of Morris Resnick for his generous contribution of expertise, time and patience over many years in setting up the computerized library management system for the South African Zionist Federation, Isie Maisels Library, 20th July 2014. And then can I call on Marcia Parnes to make a further presentation.
Thank you. All protocols observed. As Avram intimated, it hasn't been easy going. Since August 2010, all communal funding to both the Isie Maisels Library and the Joe Green Audiovisual Library stopped, and we were reliant on membership fees and the generosity of individuals to survive. We thank our donors, many of whom are here, and hope that they will continue their support. It was at the end of 2013 that the South African Zionist Federation agreed to take over the expenses once again. Without this, today's function would not have happened. It was decided that the library should be a reference library only. However, the lending library is still operational, but is now housed in the Joe Green Audiovisual Library, because thanks to Leon, we've now got space to put books on the shelves. As there is no budget to purchase new books, we're appealing to you to let us have novels of Jewish interest and whatever you can, so we can keep the lending library as alive as the reference library. Learning occurs by using our different senses. Thus, the more senses we utilize, the more effective the learning. The use of audiovisual material enables the retention of information for a longer period. With the current hostile environment that Israel is facing on a daily basis, it is essential that we know our rights and our history and are able to answer our attackers. We are proud to inform you that today the Joe Green Audiovisual Library has over 3,000 DVDs to educate, enthrall, and enjoy, from history, art, Zionism, Yiddish, feature films, and only because a very special person walked in one day and offered his help, and that was Leon Lever. The mammoth task of transferring and upgrading the videos to DVDs was enabled by him with the help of Eric Mataba. They have shown such dedication and commitment that they have now brought us into the 21st century. However, there are not enough words, Leon, to express our thanks to you. You took this crusade as a personal project. You gave us hundreds of hours of valuable time, teaching Eric, filling in the gaps of missing films, using your own equipment at your cost at home, to do transfers, sourcing, schlepping, advising us on what to purchase, and obtaining the permission from the various sources to allow the screening on a non-profit basis. You name it, Leon does it. He is the driving force behind the collection that few organizations throughout the world can boast, except for Brandeis University. And we rarely find anyone who gives of himself to the extent that Leon does. Thank you. On a personal note, I want to thank you for the support that you have given me, because it was really very important. Leon, as you well know, this is a never-ending task, and we look forward to many more productive working hours together. And I want to thank the Zionist Federation for allowing me the honor of making this presentation, because it's very special. And as a small token of appreciation for what you have done, you have been inscribed in the Golden Book of the Jewish National Fund, which is the highest honor that can be bestowed on anybody. And it says, presented to Leon Lever in deep appreciation of the outstanding work he accomplished for the new audiovisual library of the it should be the Joe Green Audiovisual Library of the SAZF Isie Maisels Reference Library. Leo, I'd like to present.
Now it's my great pleasure to call on Helen Maisels Trist to address this audience.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, Rex Gwelch QC remembered I.A. Maisels QC as the greatest advocate of his lifetime and a kind and generous and great-hearted man. Isie was certainly all of these things. He was also our father. In 1995, a year after his death, the South African Zionist Federation honoured his memory by naming the Biyachad Library after him. Walter Sisulu was present at the ceremony, as was our late mother Muriel. Some 19 years later, the community has refurbished the space, and as you saw upstairs, it is now a splendid example of a modern reference library, housing information on all matters relating to South African Jewry, Zionism and international Jewry. Ida Feldman, director of the South African Zionist Federation, asked me to make a speech about my late father at the ceremony. I'm honoured to do so, and pleased that our son Simon, my husband Benjamin, and my brother Keith are here today. My brother Jeffrey and sister Elizabeth and their families are unfortunately not able to attend. They will, however, see and hear it all on a YouTube upload. It is indeed apt that this library should bear my father's name, since he spent so much of his time at the Fed, as it was then called, in De Villiers Street, the building that housed all the Jewish organizations. The two photographs of Isie on the walls of this library encapsulate much that can be said of his extraordinary life, a life that bridged both his career as a brilliant advocate and fighter for human rights, and his service to South Africa, to Israel and the Jewish community. Firstly, there's the iconic photograph of him on the shoulders of the treason trial accused after the not guilty verdict on March the 31st, 1961. And secondly, a photograph taken of him and my mother at our home with the founder of modern Israel, David Ben-Gurion, who was in South Africa to raise funds for the Israeli United Appeal. Isie loved books and was a voracious reader, extraordinarily knowledgeable about a variety of subjects outside the law. He read widely about politics and history, and was the master of any debate in which uninformed criticism of Israel and Zionism might be advanced. How desperately do we need him today? Even in his late 80s, his knowledge of local and international current affairs was extensive. Some of our friends will attest to being questioned by Isie about their thoughts and comments on a recently reported event or opinion piece in the press. His publisher, Jonathan Ball, was constantly astonished at his absolute recall of an event, a recall that included the page and column in which it appeared in the newspaper. Isie was then 88. Isie's involvement with the Jewish community dated back to his days at Wits University in the 1920s, when he was elected the first president of the Student Zionist Organization. His participation in Jewish communal life and his commitment was such that he became president or chairman of every single major Jewish organization in South Africa. He was president of the United Hebrew Congregation and presided over his beloved Walmart Street Shul, or the Great Synagogue, which at that time was the centre of Jewish life in Johannesburg. Isie was the first South African to become a member of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency and was involved in the drawing up of the constitution for the reconstituted Jewish Agency. He was also an emeritus governor of the Weizmann Institute. As an aside, I should tell you that he was a tireless fundraiser for the IUA, and more than one business leader of the time confided in me that Isie's visits were regarded with dread and foreboding. When he sat across your desk, he had a meticulous recall of your financial capacity to help Israel. On one occasion, one industrialist said, "Well, Isie, I'm really very concerned that the money that we send doesn't go to Israel, to which Isie replied, "You shouldn't be concerned, you don't send any anyway." It was a mark of my father's stature as an advocate that in the years after 1948, when apartheid and oppression of political opponents became entrenched by successive governments of the Nationalist Party, the defenceless and the persecuted would turn to him for help. He never turned them down. Isie's very busy practice as a QC has been well documented, and he appeared in innumerable notable trials, not the least of them was the treason trial. In a letter to the family in 2011, the 50th anniversary of the treason trial, Sir Sidney Kentridge wrote to us saying it was only Isie who could have secured a not guilty verdict for all the accused. As part of the cross-examination of a witness at the trial, Isie enumerated the plethora of discriminatory legislation, asking each time whether this would not have struck the witness as unfair. When the lunch break came, Isie was accosted by one of the accused, Duma Nokwe, who later became Secretary General of the ANC in exile, and was asked whether Isie had a list of all the legislation. Isie replied that he had, but asked Nokwe why he wanted it. Nokwe replied that he had not known things were so bad. Sometime after Isie's death, we found a handwritten letter from Chief Albert Tuli to my father, in which he said, all the more powerfully for its simplicity, "What would we have done without you?" There were always piles of briefs tied in pink ribbon in the study. I was the youngest of Isie's children, and I grew up surrounded by the law and the busyness of his practice. There were consultations with clients at our house, ranging from the distinguished accused in the treason trial, Mr. Mandela, Chief Latuli, Professor Z.K. Matthews, and Walter Sisulu, to a family whose land had been dispossessed under the notorious Group Areas Act. I remember playing in the garden when a man out on bail and accused of murdering his wife came towards me. I fled into the safety of the house. There was the Bethel farm labour case in which Isie appeared for a woman whose husband had effectively been forced into slave labour. It was Isie who exposed the brutality of the system and ultimately forced changes to the past laws. We were privy to photographs of the appalling conditions in which these labourers lived, and I have never forgotten them. Commenting on Isie's contribution through the law to human rights, Sir Sidney Kentridge said, "Many of Isie's cases, especially during the long years of apartheid, were not merely cases between two litigants. They were cases about the sort of country we were living in. He seemed to attract to his practice cases which, even without any political dimension, were of extraordinary interest." My mother only once went to court to listen to Isie in cross-examination. The relentless logic of his argument, always quiet and ominously polite, was devastating. She never went again. She could not bear it. On one occasion, when examining a particularly evasive liquidator, as the morning drew to a close, he said to the witness, "Tell me, Mr. Leibovitz, what time is it?" Liquidator looked at the clock. He said, "It's 5 to 12, my lord." "Thank you," said Isie. "That's the first honest answer you've given me all morning." It's no surprise that my parents' children can also show a record of commitment to Jewish causes and support for Israel. My mother was no less committed to the community and Israel than my father. She was an honorary life president of WITSO, a staunch Zionist and community leader, and ran the legendary children's services at the Great Synagogue. Together, they were a formidable couple in their dedication and involvement in the community. Penina Herzog, wife of the late President Chaim Herzog, and at the time President of the International Council of Women, the Le Conseil International des Femmes, wrote the following in a letter to me: "Your parents were exceptional people, the like of whom you do not see anymore today. Each was great in his or her own field, and together they formed an unusually aristocratic, understanding and wonderful couple. She goes on to describe our sentiments exactly. You must have very pleasant memories of your parents, even though they must have been very busy people. They were busy indeed, mostly helping others. Isie occupied a unique position in South Africa because while there were many Jews who were active in their opposition to apartheid, there were none who were actively engaged in the way he was, as a leader of both local and international Jewry. My father often remarked that it was obviously the heritage of many of South Africa's Jewish activists, the refusal to accept injustice that we as a people have encountered so often, and the compassion that grows from it, that fueled their abhorrence of racism and their respect for human rights. He always laughed when he observed how many preferred to distance themselves from this heritage. Isie was the only South African of his time whose credibility and stature was equally recognised by the leaders of the legal profession, the ANC, the Jewish community, and the wider South African and international community. He served on the council of Wits University and received an honorary doctorate of laws in 1978. His citation noted that he was fearlessly outspoken in his condemnation of discrimination. This university seeks to honour a man who contributed greatly not only to the practice and defence of the law and the defence of human rights, but who has been prominent in Jewish affairs and public life and who has done much to safeguard and foster the welfare of this institution. Helen Suzman told me more than once that she was undeservedly respected for opposing the nationalists in Parliament single-handedly. She said that behind her were two formidable men, Harry Oppenheimer and Isie Maisels. Any foreigner coming to Mrs. Suzman's doorstep who wished to find out about the South African Jewish community was sent immediately to see Isie. We grew up in a household where talk of fundraising for Israel, the Fed and the United Hebrew Congregation were an everyday occurrence. We had visits to our house from some of Israel's greatest leaders, David Ben-Gurion, Chaim and Penina Herzog, Yitzhak and Leah Rabin, to name a few. It was in recognition of my father's standing that, when he was released from jail, it was to Isie that Mr. Mandela turned when he wanted to reach out to the Jewish community. He called my father, and the conversation went like this. Mr. Maisels, this is Mr. Mandela. How is Mrs. Maisels? My father then replied, she is fine, thank you. The conversation then continued, I understand, Mr. Maisels, that the Jewish community is offended because I approached the PLO for assistance. Not at all, my father replied. You went to those you knew would support you. My father then went on to suggest that a meeting be held between Mr. Mandela and the leaders of the Jewish community, which took place in June 1990. Around that time, the Washington Post published an interview with my father following this historic meeting, in which Isie told the newspaper the following. Mr. Mandela assured those present that neither he nor the ANC had sought to cause offence to the Jewish people, and asserts his own and the ANC's unswerving opposition to anti-Semitism and their appreciation of the efforts of many Jewish people in the common effort to bring justice and peace to all peoples of South Africa. The paper went on to say, Maisels said Mandela recognised Israel's right to exist, but no mention was made of this in the joint statement. I don't need the acknowledgement of Mr. Mandela or anybody else of the right of Israel to exist, Maisels said. He said it would be demeaning to seek such endorsement. Nevertheless, Mr. Mandela's statement is particularly poignant and stands in stark contrast today to those utterances by certain members of the ANC about Israel and the Jews in recent days following the distressing events in Israel and Gaza. Our family treasures a Rosh Hashanah card that Mr. Mandela sent Isie while in Pollsmoor prison. It is now in the Jewish Museum in Cape Town. Along with a birthday card that he sent to my father on his 80th birthday via George Bezos saying, "Take it easy, Isie." At a dinner that took place at my parents' house in January 94, at which my husband and I were present, Mr. Mandela attended, accompanied by Joel Marcus and the then Israeli ambassador Alon Eliel and his wife. The idea that night, and remember this, Isie was then 88 years old, and it was some 10 years after he left active Jewish leadership, that my father would arrange for there to be diplomatic relations between Botswana and Israel. Isie had recently retired from his position as president of the Court of Appeal of Botswana, Lesotho and Swaziland, but he was still able to influence affairs. Jill, I'm so pleased that you could come today. Jill and I were at primary and high school together. We have a long association, and it is generally acknowledged that there could be no better governor of the Reserve Bank than she. Isie and Muriel were meticulous in the way they conducted their lives as Jews. They were compassionate and helpful. They were staunch supporters and friends of many of Israel's great leaders. They believed in the peace process and supported it in every way they could. The Zionism in which they believed was not based on a messianic philosophy, but on the necessity for the establishment of a Jewish state. A staunch supporter of Israel's right to defend itself, Isie decried any form of extremism and did not support the expansionist policy of the building of settlements. As children, we benefited from his wise counsel and from his absolute integrity. He had an extraordinary wit and sense of humour that was both dry and irreverent. He certainly was conservative in outlook from time to time, and he had absolutely no telephone manner. When a conversation was finished, he would put the phone down. He had no sense of the formalities around saying goodbye into a plastic instrument. But all this went with kindness and compassion and a sense of rigorous discipline and toughness. It was not easy to negotiate with him, and we children had a slim chance of winning an argument. He taught us to speak up for those less fortunate, to speak up for principles in which one believed, whatever the circumstances. He taught us to do this in such a way that one did not personally offend those with whom one disagreed. An American friend and co-governor with Isie on the Jewish Agency, a wealthy philanthropist, had this to say about Isie, and I'm sure that many of you here identify with the sentiment. Jews don't often listen to other Jews, but when Isie stands up to talk at a Board of Governors meeting of the Jewish Agency, they listen to him and listen good. There was the public face of Isie, the wonderful orator and the brilliant advocate for the underdog that many saw. What the public did not know was that in many instances, including the treason trial, and particularly when it involved a black South African or a victim of the then appalling apartheid legislation or a death in detention, he gave his services pro bono. There were many evenings at home when the phone would ring and a member of the public would phone to say that his child was in trouble with the law. And then Isie, who was usually sitting reading a brief for the next day in court, would take the time to help as much as he could, suggesting that the caller come round on the weekend to discuss the problem. There are a few simple anecdotes which illustrate the reverence in which he was held in the community. One young rabbi once stood up in our shul in the early 90s and made an anti-peace process sermon. Isie called Rabbi Harris, then chief rabbi, and told him in no uncertain terms that he was to please instruct his rabbi not to preach war from the pulpit of the great synagogue. He also admonished a rabbi who was new to the synagogue for not saying the prayer for Israel. To those near who were talking during the service, he was known to fix them with a glare and ask, "Is the chazan disturbing you?" Isie was essentially a modest man. He did not approve of the naming of gifts given to a synagogue or an institution, preferring, as he did on many occasions, to remain anonymous. Perhaps the only entity of which he would have approved would have been this library in his name, housed by the community that he loved and he served so well for so long. As a family, we can think of no better way to honour his memory, and we are grateful for it. And prayers for Isie. He died at the age of 89. The late Rabbi Harris said of him, Isie Maisels had a great mind, a truly wonderful intellect, a great heart, which moved him constantly to do the right thing in the kindest possible way, and a great soul, a Yiddische neshama, which moved him to be such a devout and honourable Jew. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Ellen, thank you for that most poignant tribute to your father and father to all of us, in a sense, this entire community. Thank you everyone for attending. I would like to thank one person who has made all of this happen, both the implementation of the library, actually even this room and this event tonight, and that is Isla Feldman, the Executive Director of Designers Federation. And if everyone would join us next door for tea, thank you very much for attending.